You walk into the grocery store and something feels wrong. The same basket of food costs more than it did a year ago. Not a little more, noticeably more. Rent is up, insurance is up, gas is up. Your paycheck might even be higher than it was. And yet, something still doesn't add up. Life feels harder to afford, not easier. The math should work, but it doesn't. Most people stop at the obvious explanation. Prices went up. That's inflation. End of sentence. But it isn't the end of the sentence. Because the real question isn't just why everything costs more. The real question is, what happened to the money? In the last episode, we separated money from currency and looked at how the thing people use in everyday transactions doesn't always preserve purchasing power over time. That distinction leads directly here. Because inflation is the mechanism that makes money less trustworthy, and the definition most people use, prices going up, stops at the symptom without reaching the cause. In this episode, we're going to separate what inflation looks like from what it actually is. Economists generally disagree about its causes and measurement, and supply-side factors are real, but the monetary dimension, the purchasing power dimension, is the part most often missing from the conversation. Inflation, as most people experience it, means things cost more. Groceries, rent, a restaurant meal, a tank of gas. What used to cost a certain amount now costs more. That's how inflation feels. And it's not wrong to notice it that way. But if you stop at prices, if you define inflation as simply prices going up, you've described the symptom without asking what caused it. Here's a better frame. Inflation is what happens when money buys less than it used to. Not just when one thing becomes more expensive, but when the purchasing power of money itself weakens, so that the same amount of currency commands fewer real goods than before. Think about what that means. The same paycheck, fewer groceries. The same savings balance, less real security. The same amount of work, fewer things to show for it. Prices are how people see inflation. Purchasing power is what they're actually losing. But that still leaves the deeper question. If inflation means money buys less, why does money buy less? What actually causes purchasing power to fall? Before getting to the cause, we need to clear something up. Because one of the fastest ways to misunderstand inflation is to treat every price increase as the same kind of event. They aren't. A major drought hits a major wheat growing region, and food prices rise. A war disrupts oil supply, and energy prices spike. A global shipping bottleneck adds cost to supply chains, and prices for manufactured goods climb. All of these are real price increases. They're all legitimately painful. But they are not the same thing as broad monetary inflation. A supply shock changes the prices of some goods relative to others. When a drought cuts harvests, wheat becomes scarcer and more expensive relative to things the drought didn't touch. Monetary inflation weakens money itself, eroding the general purchasing power of money so that broadly and over time, the same amount buys less. Now you might ask, if a drought makes food cost more, isn't the dollar buying less food either way? The answer is yes. But because food became scarcer, not because money became weaker. When the drought ends, that pressure eases. Monetary erosion doesn't reverse when conditions change. Supply shocks change relative prices. Monetary inflation changes the measuring tool. So what actually causes purchasing power to fall broadly over time? Inflation begins when the total amount of money and credit in an economy expands faster than the real goods and services people can buy. More claims on real goods, same real output, weaker purchasing power per claim. Imagine a concert venue with 1,000 seats. Someone prints 2,000 tickets. The venue hasn't changed. The seats haven't changed. But each ticket is now worth half a seat. The number went up, but the real value went down. That's the mechanism. Now here's how it happens in the modern world. When a bank makes a loan, it creates new purchasing power that didn't exist before, without a corresponding new good or service being produced. Not by moving someone else's savings, by creating a new deposit. New claims on real goods entering the economy. Now, if credit expands in step with real production, the system can absorb it. The problem arises when credit expands faster than production. When new purchasing power floods into an economy that isn't producing proportionally more in return. Rome gives us the oldest, clear version of this. The Roman denarius started as nearly pure silver. Over centuries, emperors, facing budget pressures, reduced the silver content while keeping the coin's name and denomination unchanged. Prices didn't spike immediately. They adjusted over time, as markets absorbed the reality that each coin carried less real value. Soldiers demanding grain instead of silver. Merchants adjusting prices upward. Trust eroding. Same mechanism, different technology. When money becomes less trustworthy, prices eventually reveal it. If inflation is a monetary phenomenon, why doesn't everything get more expensive at the same rate at the same time? Because new money doesn't arrive everywhere at once. It enters the economy through specific channels, and those channels determine who feels it first. The sequence tends to look like this. Financial assets rise first. New money entering through banks and investment channels bid up stocks, bonds, and real estate. People with existing assets see their wealth grow. Housing becomes less affordable next. As credit expands and asset prices climb, property values rise. The same home becomes harder to buy for someone without existing assets. Consumer prices follow. Groceries, insurance, everyday costs. These rise later as new purchasing power works through supply chains and into ordinary goods. Wages adjust last. An employee doesn't get a cost of living raise the morning after credit expands. Wages move through negotiation, through labor market pressure over time. The gap between rising prices and rising pay is when ordinary workers lose real ground. Not through any single event, but through accumulation. The people positioned earliest in that sequence see purchasing power gains, and the people positioned last absorb the costs. Wages are a lagging indicator. Prices move first, and paychecks catch up later, if they ever catch up at all. That gap is not a blip. For many people, it lasts months, sometimes years. During that period, the work they're doing buys less than it used to. Not because they became less productive, but because the purchasing power of the money they're paid in quietly eroded. The same thing happens to savings. Your balance earns interest, let's say 1%. If the general price level is rising at 4%, your balance grows in dollar terms, but those dollars buy less than a year ago. You are wealthier on paper and poorer in purchasing power, and it compounds. Weimar Germany in 1923 is the extreme version of this. Workers were paid twice daily, not as a perk, but so they could spend wages before afternoon prices rose further. A wheelbarrow of cash to buy bread. Lifetimes of savings destroyed. That is the endpoint of monetary breakdown. Most people never experience anything that extreme, but the mechanism runs along a spectrum. The degree differs, but the direction is the same. But even moderate inflation systematically advantages people holding assets over people holding cash savings. Whether that redistribution is acceptable is partly a question of values. What this episode argues is that understanding it requires looking at the monetary mechanism, not just the prices on the surface. Most people think inflation means prices rising. That's how it appears on the surface. But inflation begins somewhere deeper, when money and credit expand faster than the real goods those claims can buy. Prices are how people eventually notice. Purchasing power is what they're actually losing, and it doesn't arrive evenly. It moves through the economy from financial assets outward, reaching wages last. So when your savings buy less, and life feels harder to plan, the real question isn't just why prices rose, it's what happened to the money. That question has a specific institutional answer. Someone decides how much money and credit enter the economy, through what channels, and under what rules. That's what we're going to look at next time. This is The Honest Ledger. See you next time.